and welcome to the Kink Perspective. My name's Chris. I'm a psychotherapist and consultant. On today's show, I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to talk about something different, something that I've been seeing growing lately, trends around social media, which is part of this show, especially within inside of our lifestyle community, where I'm watching what people are discussing and how they're using words against others and phrases and so on and so forth. Today, what I really want to talk about is three different things. I want to talk about the overuse or the use of the word incels inside of the BDSM community. I want to talk about cultural appropriation, which apparently that's been coming up a lot, about certain practices. And boy, are we going to need a history. We're getting a history lesson today. And finally, I want to bring up some misinformation, because people like just to say things, especially I tend to see one group of people say this. It's funny, the groups, I don't care if you're left or right or in the middle, I tend to be more of a moderate conservative. I'm kind of sit in the middle. Tend to kind of sling this back and forth at each other. But when one group does it more than the other, and it doesn't really matter who it is, then we become hypocritical and we tend not to look at the issues that we are causing ourselves. We tend to just have blinders on and have confirmation bias and try to really just look at one issue and go, oh yeah, this is the problem, and it applies everywhere. So over these last couple of weeks on social media like fetish.com or FetLife, or there's a couple of new ones out there I don't really know, I'm not following, or I'm not part of it, on X, Instagram even, or some Facebook communities, incels has been popping up, just brandishing all men as incels. This is problematic behavior. First off, here's the number one reason, and we're going to break some things down here so we get a clearer understanding of what we're actually saying or doing. First off, we're supposed to be a community of acceptance and divergence, right? Or diversity. We're supposed to be wide and fast. Now, to understand this whole movement first, and I don't agree with it. There's nothing I agree with in as far as the extremism part of their group. Let's look at a little history here. The term incel is short, if you've never heard this before, for involuntary celibate. All right? And it started somewhere about 30 years ago in the early 90s, with the online communities that were starting to emerge. Initially, it kind of referred to individuals, typically men, who were unable to find a romantic or sexual partner despite their desires. And they were sharing their stories. However, over time, this morphed and it became muddled. It became full of hatred and this very prehistoric view of men and women together. So somewhere in that beginning, it was like, the self-identifier was used by people seeking support, and they wanted to help, talk with others about understanding their struggles, what it's like to be alone. So we were actually there was a point when men were actually talking to other men and speaking about their emotional experiences. Now, of course, there's always going to be these weird fringe elements, and then that tends to that complicates an issue. Instead of saying, here's a community you can talk about your feelings, women do it, and women have private groups where they talk about their struggles and everything else, which is great, and we all support that. This was somewhere kind of how it started. Unfortunately, then you get very detached individuals that are extreme or angry or have whatever other complicated issues in their life, and the name took on a darker connotation, right? So the problem is now if somebody responds to a post, or they don't respond to a post, or they send an email or a direct message or whatever the case may be, and somebody doesn't like it, typically on the woman's side, the labels just start getting thrown around as you're an incel. And then the next part is, if the person starts trying to defend themselves, then the rhetoric keeps coming, and it doesn't just come from one or two people, it avalanches. So labeling men as incels leads to an oversimplification, and it creates a harmful stereotype. And while it's true there are some of these people that identify in this and exhibit some of these extreme views or behaviors, it's unfair to just start generally applying this label broadly to everyone. That would be like me just saying, well, all women are stupid. Nope, there's none of you are smart. You're all stupid. Right? Well, we can't do that because that's not true. Some people may be dumb, but other people are highly intelligent. Some of the most prolific leaders in the world are highly intelligent women. So we can't just apply something broadly. Now, I do understand that there are women on these websites and they're promoting themselves or they're doing whatever, or they're claiming they're exhibitionists. Ultimately, they're not. That's a different. I've talked about this before about flashing in public. That's actually a crime, but I don't want to detract here. But then they start deriding people because of the comments that they receive. Now, I don't agree with any comment inside of our community that's disparaging. I don't understand why we're not being respectful. Whenever I've ever reached out to anyone, regardless if it's a pleasantry or I'm answering a question, I always start it by saying greetings or hello, and whatever name that they're using, whatever screen name. And if they've asked me a question or they've sent me a nice message, I respond, I thank them, and I go from there. Now, a lot of this tends to stem, I think, has been a problem over the past about 20 years where we've started to, emasculate men a little bit more. And this is going to lead me to my final segment today about misinformation, and it's going to kind of be covered here because there is a prominent person who is far more intelligent than I am, who has decades more experience in therapy than I do as a clinician. And he's somehow, got into being the voice of this movement. I don't really believe that Dr. Jordan Peterson is. I respect the man. He's got a lot of academic credit. I mean, he's more credible than most people I know. He's taught at Harvard. And a lot of people in our community sit here and call him, and I'll get to that a little bit later. But there are a lot of these men that they're struggling. They're socially awkward, and I get that. And they don't know how to talk to people, and it's difficult and hard, and it's becoming more difficult. I've talked about this before. A man in their 20s actually has far fewer choices for a mate than a woman in her 20s. And they can be the polar opposites as far as even looks, right? So with that said, moving forward over time through biology, as a woman gets older, her chances for a mate start to go down while a man's chances for a mate tend to start increasing a bit more. But when we struggle and just start applying, hatred towards women, then there's a problem. And I will stand with any person that's being threatened or anything else, because those people, they don't deserve to be in our community. And that's not about gatekeeping or anything else. I don't agree with violence. I don't agree with threats. That's not a way to have a discourse around things. And that's one thing that seems to be missing inside of our community is discourse and talking to people, ridiculing them and talking down to them, and saying this is I will never believe that some things are a constant stream. They're just not. Especially when we have the ability to block and cut off contact. But anyways, I'm digressing. Many men who struggle in their romantic lives, they're not part of any extremist online movement or community, or let alone are they involved in harmful activities. But by categorizing them all as incels, we're literally pushing these individuals into that isolation, into that growing despair, that deep-seated depression. It discourages them at all from talking about getting help, discussing their problems openly. They fear being stigmatized or associated with negative stereotypes, instead of encouraging them to approach people with understanding and us approaching them with some empathy. The labeling perpetuates a divisive nature, and it can be very detrimental to someone's mental health and their well-being. And I'm going to give you a perfect example. many, many years ago, there was somebody, God, this was, I don't know, 15 or 20 years ago, there was somebody I was seeing who was a completely toxic relationship, but an argument ensued, and it left me quite upset. While they went to the person I was seeing, she went to her therapist. The information she gave was one sided. Well, her therapist came across and said, oh, well, something sounds like those are narcissistic traits. And I've spoken about narcissism before because that's another word that we tend to throw around quite a bit. But it's a very powerful term. And quite frankly, on a planet of 8 billion people, when there's only about no more than 2% of the entire population that is completely diagnosed with this, we throw this term around a lot. And I've spoken about that at length as well. So when she came back and told me this, I had actually no idea what the word meant. And it sent me down a very big spiral. I got depressed and all these things. It caused me to go into therapy way back in the day. And I really had to be quite introspective and look at these things and try to understand them. But again, it was a harmful label, and that ultimately it wasn't true because it was a very one-sided discussion. I don't want to digress too much here, but if you're getting my point and what I'm saying, we just slap a label on somebody and we're calling them something, and it has a detrimental effect. So we need to understand that the term incel originally emerged as a way for people to find support and understanding why they were in this celibacy, right? Especially that it's involuntary as the way they see it. Me, I think that they need to be understand who they are as people and what they can offer a potential partner, and then work on those things and build their confidence. But that's a different discussion. Now, over time, this meaning has been distorted. It's largely due to the misuse as a derogatory term. And I mean, I see it every time. Every time I log on to social media, people are slinging the word incel. It's kind of like saying the word rape. If you keep using it over and over, you're diminishing the capacity of the word itself, right? We're just getting rid of it. It doesn't really mean anything anymore. So when we're looking actually at a person or a man who expresses frustration or discontent in their romantic lives, and you quickly just call him an incel, this not only oversimplificates their complex experiences, but diminishes the word's meaning as where it started. This dilution, is problematic because it fails to address the underlying issues that these individuals are facing. They could be having mental health problems or social difficulties or the pressures. They feel the pressures of the modern dating culture. And my God, I wouldn't want to be a guy now. You can't open a car door or open a door for someone. You can't buy them dinner. You can't ask certain questions. So the world has become much more complex, and this creates a lot of internal struggles. And it creates pressures, and it's got to create pressures on everybody all the way around. But by misusing the term, we divert attention away from the root causes and the potential solutions for these problems, ultimately hindering progress in addressing the issues at hand. And again, I don't agree with any like threats or name calling inside of the lifestyle at all. We come to it for the love of the lifestyle. We come to it because we all enjoy BDSM. We love the community. We want to watch all of these things. But making wild and erroneous claims against people, it's not helpful. So rather than hastily labeling every man you come across, whether they even have a partner or not, and that's the fun one I always see, they're calling somebody an incel who's like married and's got kids, they totally don't even understand the word. But in turn, we should really be striving for empathy and understanding, engaging in these open and non-judgmental conversations. Now, obviously, we're all going to have a point. And again, I don't encourage anyone to, if people are being rude, and it doesn't matter what side it's being on, but to try to understand. I mean, if we're about a community of diversity and acceptance, well, these people are alone and they're trying to join our community, then we should be welcoming and accepting. It doesn't make them an incel just because they're not dating anyone. But that's pretty much what a lot of these people, especially very progressive people seem to be doing. And it's causing harm. And in the community where we base our responses, we base consent, we base our actions on, the precipice of risk. We discuss constantly those things where, is this hurtful, which is good for us, or is it harmful? We're doing harm. But it's, and I don't like the argument that it's, oh, well, it's just a man, they're going to get over it. Well, that's not the point. They're a person. You don't harm people. But that's, it's the thing that's going around. And it's kind of really upset me. To be honest with you, it's pissed me off, which is why I'm doing this today. And then, and personally, me, I don't care when they attack me. You smack people with facts and you hit them with an objective truth, and they, sit there and cry and moan, and I can really care less because they're not trying. They're just trying to make everybody else as miserable as they are. And it doesn't work. You're not advancing the community. You make it look worse. At the next discussion that kind of spurred this past couple of weeks, a couple of people actually, I had about 3 people reach out to me. There was a couple of different posts that were kind of surrounding the concept of cultural appropriation, or, appreciating other cultures and going from there. So I think we need to understand first that what we're really looking at is the nature of cultural borrowing. The concept of cultural appropriations gained a lot of attention over the last, 5, 10, maybe 15 years. Now, while the intention behind raising awareness about respecting cultural differences is great, there's a growing concern about the overuse and the misapplication of this term. I mean, we're just slapping it on everything. Oh, you wear dreadlocks. Well, that's cultural appropriation. Well, no, sorry. And I'm going to get to that. Now, at its core, culture is not static, but a dynamic entity that evolves through interactions with other cultures. This is how they grow. This natural cultural exchange is a testament to the interconnectedness of humanity itself. We are a cultural melting pot in every community we live in. There are, Italian restaurants or Chinese restaurants or yoga studios, all of these different practices. But if we label every instance of it as appropriation, we risk stifling cultural evolution for the sake of protecting something that's ultimately, in the end, not even ours. So how do we kind of start countering some of these arguments that borrowing from other cultures is inherently wrong? Well, I want to provide you with some examples, and I'm actually going to even get into some BDSM examples and some other things, because we are at a point where it's impacting people. They're stopping their love for things just because somebody's raising their hand and somebody somewhere used this 500 years ago and you shouldn't do it. Well, it turns out you weren't the only one, and these cultures weren't even connected. So let's look at something that's very prominent, and I mentioned it before. Now, yoga, it's originating in an ancient Indian tradition, and it's a global phenomenon now, embraced by millions upon millions of people in various cultural backgrounds. Beyond its physical aspects, yoga offers mental and spiritual benefits. It calms the mind, it centers the body, and brings the two into harmony. And it demonstrates at its core how this beautiful cultural exchange has enriched and brought well-being across the world. Should we not share that with people? Should I not recommend that to my clients as a way of maintaining their wellness? No? We shouldn't do that? What about acupuncture? Because I know there are some people who believe in more of a homeopathic approach to medicine. That was originally developed in China, but it's now become widely accepted as alternative medicine, and it's practiced all over the world. So are we now just telling people, screw the effectiveness of its potential various health applications? Only certain people can do it, or more so, only certain people can benefit from it. I mean, did you hear the argument that this is what the people are saying? What about the appreciation for martial arts? Stuff like karate from Okinawa or judo from Japan or taekwondo from Korea. These have become global practices on not only self-defense, but self-discipline, rigor, commitment. They go beyond the art itself. They promote physical fitness, but they emphasize respect and personal growth. Should we not, should those masters of those arts not teach anybody? So the one that came up apparently this past week was about hook pulling. And another one I saw recently talked about only certain people should be involved in the leather community because leather was somehow attributed. Now, that was the dumbest one I have heard, that leather was somehow only attributed to one culture on the entire planet and we should not be using it somewhere in the African. And it's just absolutely, fundamentally, completely wrong and false. And that'll lead me to misinformation later. Now, we understand that in BDSM, we have incorporated a lot of things inside of our practices and rituals over the decades. I mean, hell, the phrase BDSM didn't even really exist until the 60s, 50s or 60s. We created it. But I mean, should we be paying homage to the person who first started bondage somewhere and stop using the word bondage? But, for Euro people, and I'm not really saying my community or the people who listen to me, but, when you encounter these things, I mean, some of these people are involved in rope bondage, like Japanese rope bondage, with shibari or kinbaku, right? Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. But this is a specific style of Japanese rope bondage, right? And as we learned a few weeks ago, these patterns to bind and restrain people, these roots are traditional Japanese. And the history of it goes quite far back. So does that mean no one else on the planet should ever do shibari? How about one I don't participate in, I don't really find it interesting, but I do find some of the aesthetics part interesting. Victorian and Edwardian erotica. Now, the aesthetics and the clothing styles of the Victorian and Edwardian eras have influenced BDSM fashion and roleplay. Corsets, leather, lace from this period are often incorporated into what we wear. Additionally, the themes from Victorian and Edwardian literature, such as dominance and submission, have inspired the roleplay scenarios we now encounter or the terminology we're using today. So what, no one else on the planet can use these things? Apparently I was told, or I recently read something, that it was somewhere in I don't know, it was either South Africa or one of the southern countries of Africa that started the leather movement, and no one else ever wore it before them. Well, cultures all over the world have worn leather armor or leather attire, so they're not, and they have no cross-cultural exchange that was ever recorded. So you can't just say one person was doing this and that's it. It may have, I'm sure everything evolved with the first person who did it, but that doesn't mean that they just own the rights to it. There was animals all over. Or wearing cloth clothing or animal furs to stay warm. I mean, these arguments become so asinine, but they're wrapped in so much guilt, and especially they get targeted at white people, which then to me becomes you're being racist. And if we don't really understand that term, the basis is we're discriminating against somebody because of their skin color. And that word goes no further in its definition. When you tell me that certain groups can't be racist because it's some sort of weird thing that's been amended to the dictionary to add about power, that's stupid by nature. If I'm being assaulted because of the color of my skin, that's a hate crime, period, and end of stop. Different subject for a different day, and I'm not going to get into that today. So let me get into this other aspect. What about the European dominance and submission practices, the elements of dominance and submission found in European history, such as the feudal lordships and servitude? They've influenced our BDSM power dynamics for generations. So many practitioners, myself included, draw inspiration from this historical power structures and our rituals that we take forward. So what, if you're not maybe of European ancestry, you can't participate at all inside of BDSM? The other one I saw was about hook play. So if you're not familiar, that's where you're taking hooks, putting them through your skin, and you're being suspended. Now, there were some transcendent properties and ritualistic practices. Most recently, I heard that this was part of a Native American tribe. I can't recall its exact name, so I'm just going to kind of give it a more broad name here. But they were saying that this was part of their practices and nobody basically in BDSM should be doing it except them or the people, their teachers. Well, unfortunately, there are cultures all over the world, going all the way back to Mesopotamia, that have done it. Ottoman Empire have done it. Mongolians. I've looked into it. It's history. It's there. There's even some other Europeans, I think somewhere either in Croatia or what is now Slovakia. There was people doing it there. None of these groups had cross-cultural connections at all. Now, it is quite possible that one person who was maybe a traveler and selling wares saw this and took it somewhere else and talked about it like we often do and said, oh my God, what do you think of this? Or, hey, I saw this and it looks amazing, looks painful as hell, looks amazing. What if we try this? That's a possibility. I don't know. I wasn't alive 1,500 years ago. So we can't just start claiming things and say nobody can wear it. And when I brought up the part before about dreadlocks, it's typically African Americans. They're just Americans that are saying you can't wear this because it goes back to his roots in Africa. Well, yeah, I guess technically Egyptians are Africans, but they tend to call themselves Egyptians. They were wearing it. Again, the Vikings were wearing dreadlocks. They had no cross-cultural connection. And they were wearing dreadlocks and braids long prior to meeting any of those people in the Mediterranean. So who gets to claim it? We have to understand and address these instances where the cultural exchange, it can be disrespectful or harmful. I get it. And we can't just, though, label every act of borrowing as cultural appropriation. This hinders our positive cultural sharing. Food. This transcends borders with global appreciation for diverse dishes from around the world. Sushi from Japan, Italian pasta, Spanish tapas, right? They're beloved the world over. And this showcases how cultural fusion can be celebrated in diverse flavors. I mean, maybe, I've got Spanish and Central American and German heritage, but, maybe none of you should be able to eat the food that's from my heritage because it's important to me. Sorry, you're appropriating it. You can never cook it. I mean, it just sounds ridiculous. We're isolating. We began the isolation of ourselves and everybody else around us. I'm sorry for a lot of the background noise today. It's quite busy where I live. Typically, it's a little bit more quiet. Instead of us just, hastily labeling every exchange as appropriation, we should strive for understanding, have discussions that can help us navigate the complexities of our cultures, and ensure that this occurs with respect and sensitivity, right? I can appreciate and have respect for the diverse experiences and traditions of others, and we can celebrate our shared humanity while honoring the uniqueness of every culture I come across. I strive for it. I spent time in South Korea, and it was one of the best cultural exchanges. Does that mean I should never go there because I'm not from there? I mean, at what point is these statements are going to become so asinine and stupid? We're just going to move into, I'm going to lock myself in the closet and never pop out. I mean, in that sense, the originators of the homogeneous species that we are, who first discovered breathing, none of us should be breathing because you're appropriating that from somebody else. I mean, do you see how dumb it sounds when you encounter some of these arguments? And this kind of leads me to, throughout this discussion of where this is today inside of our community, the power of these labels and the misinformation that seems to be out there. Like I encountered the other day, misinformation about COVID-19. It's still going. We're years and years out of lockdowns. I don't know what's going on in America and why, different story right now. But misinformation is more pronounced than ever. And labels, when we misapply or overuse them, they diminish the truth. And they serve to become a weapon to discredit individuals with credibility. A lot of credibility. There was a professor, if you all remember, I think it was in Washington State, if I recall correctly. I know it was on the West Coast. He was either Washington or Oregon. He was a professor named Brett Weinstein. He's an evolutionary biologist. I don't know if he's still. I know he's a professor. He was called a racist because he raised concerns about a controversial event at a school, a university, or no, it was a college. Sorry, because there was a proposed day of absence, and I'll never forget when this came up, and it says where white students and faculty shouldn't be on the campus for an entire day. How absolutely segregated is that? How absolutely racist is that? The world isn't safe. I actually blame progressive academia for this line of thinking, because what got you to the point to believe that this somehow was okay? I honestly believe advocates like Martin Luther King or even Malcolm X would be turning over in their grave, because these were the men that fought against the very notion of segregation. Yet these individuals are asking for colleges to create certain dormitories for only certain races. I want you to think about that for a second. That's like, and I've seen this at community events. This event is for certain people only. Now that's fine. You want to have a private event that's only for Asian people. Cool. So the Asian region is quite large. That covers all the way from India to parts of the South Pacific to the parts of the Northwest Pacific. No, that's too vast. So we're going to, now it's only down to like Chinese and Japanese people. Okay, well, what about Taiwanese or Korean? I mean, you start getting more and more specific. So now you're really going, I want to have an event for people who only speak Mandarin that are Chinese. Okay, well, fine. I'm probably not going to be able to, talk to anybody there. Cool enough, have fun. But when we're isolating and doing all of these other things, instead of getting into discussions and understanding why, we're just labeling people racists. And these things detract from the real issues at hand, and they diminish the truth of arguments. And often when I see people like I mentioned earlier, when they're throwing out the incel comments, and of course they like to bash Dr. Jordan Peterson. Now look, I don't agree with everything this guy says, but I have respect for Dr. Peterson. 40 years as a clinical psychologist in private practice. He's taught at Harvard. I don't know how many people I've ever met at Munches or anything else that may or may not have went to Harvard, or the University of Harvard or Harvard University, whatever. I don't know how many people. But to call somebody like this a pseudoscientist, first, I don't even understand. I kind of leads me to the point you don't even understand what the word pseudo means, which means fake, not real. It completely undermines his intellectual credibility, which is far superior. You may not agree, and that's fine. But that doesn't mean he's fake. It blows my mind when people do this inside of our community, and they throw these things out there like it's some sort of standard to go by, and it's just not true. So how do we navigate all of these things that I've been trying to mention to you today? You have to be willing to engage your own critical thinking. You have to go into your own fact checking. You have to look and be willing to open yourself up to talk to someone. You have to be willing to understand that everything that's borrowed from or looked at or, put into the melting pot of a culture isn't stealing. It enriches all of our activities. We are a diverse and grand community that really are come together for the love of it. Now, if I see somebody that's, maybe from Australia that's figured a new way of, instead of using bamboo to create a tie or use for bondage, and they're using, I don't know, they grab a didgeridoo. If you're not familiar with that, it's a musical instrument from Australia. I mean, what? Is somebody going to get pissed off for it? That the whole point of our lifestyle is that we get really creative in using things at hand that might even be better or easier to use, more comfortable, or inflict more pain. But we're just, I think what it really comes down to when I look at a lot of these people, they're just fucking angry. You're just looking for something to be angry at for the sake of being angry. And I don't understand. I mean, how are you part of a community and then, or claim to be a part of a community, and then want to isolate so many people? Every time I hear somebody tell me I'm so inclusive, they're the least inclusive people I have ever met. I don't care the people in my life that surround me. I don't care who they have sex with, because it's none of my fucking business. I don't care about their political ideologies. I don't care about their religious status. I don't care about their personal views. I care because they're my friend, and I engage in really fun and enjoyable conversations with them. Do we disagree? Of course we disagree, but we disagree like normal human beings. I don't then start running out and going, oh my God, fucking person A told me this. Can you believe this? What a bigot they are. Why? Because their view differs from mine. And then we start insulting them, and we just become angry because we're looking for some cause. Because ultimately, when you do all of these things, when you say all of these things, there's something lacking in your life. And you're hurting the community. You're not making our community better. You're making the community worse when you do these types of things, and you keep it going. And I know it's not you all who engage with, I don't know, somebody decided to attack my show because they didn't like what I had to say, so they wanted to downgrade me for some stupid reason. I don't know why, because I offended them somehow. Didn't explain what they didn't like in some interview I did, but with, I think I've only had about 6 or 7 guests on. A couple times, I've had a couple of repeat guests. So I'm just angry. There was no dialogue. There's no nothing. I'm not a purveyor of anything. Okay, well, that's fine. But why then the insults? Because it's just what we default to. But we become many people, not all of us, but many people become so angry inside of our culture globally. And it's not just our community, that it's this hurt and this pain that they don't know how to transgress. So in the meantime, what they do is they let and take that out on everybody else. So I kind of think I've done enough kind of semi-ranting for the day. This wasn't as long as the one I did yesterday. I'm sorry about that. I screwed that up and I hit the delete button. I'd kind of like to let I'm going to put up some questions about what you think about these topics. And I'd like to kind of get some feedback, because this is how we keep a healthy adult discussion going, especially within our community, the community that we are trying to protect and love and, keep from getting completely stuck back underground or going from there. If you do follow me on Spotify, on the app, I do ask, if you like my show, please rate it 5 stars. Please don't downgrade me just because you're mad at me. There was somebody who's already done that intentionally, because their quote unquote was, I shouldn't have a platform to speak, so I'm going to make sure that, I'm going to make your show a 0. And I'm like, well, that's just dumb. If you don't like me, don't listen. So they keep coming back and listening, but making new accounts and downgrading my show. So if you actually like my show, could you mark it 5 stars so other people in the community can find it? I do have a book out. Yes. Tangled Desires, the intersection of psychology and BDSM. Yes, I'm still working on the edit. I apologize. I'm really slow about that, but life, I've got a lot of things going on. So a lot to think about today. Maybe some personal reflection on some of us that have, said or done any of the things I've mentioned today, or some of the arguments, or another side of the argument you haven't considered. So I'll leave you all with that thought. Until next time, everybody, Be safe and stay kinky.